You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 285.
Today's podcast is brought to you by hititboard.com and the Teeter Teach It, an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hititboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com.
Today, we're going to dive a bit deeper into the topic of private lessons. So first, I want to outline what I mean by this. So when I think of private lessons, I differentiate that different from a class setting or a seminar setting. So classes is what many people may be used to. Usually they're an hour to 90 minutes long, one instructor, 6 to 7 people. You know, you come in and you have that group setting, but you're usually signing up for a 6 or 8 week class. So the instructor gets to know you a little bit over the length of that time. Seminars tend to be longer in length, similar group, maybe 6 to 8 or 8 to 10. If you're doing a full day seminar, maybe a half day, 3.5, 4 hours, full day, 7 hours. Or you'll see even camps, right? Camps being, 3 or 4 days, 2 or 3 days where you'll rotate around. But private lessons, specifically what we're talking about today, is one-on-one. I'm not even going to dive into semi-privates too much, but one instructor, one student, generally an hour in length, but they could be longer. Maybe you have multiple dogs. And I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about this because it came from a day where I had multiple private lessons. I do a fair amount of private lessons, multiple private lessons throughout the day. And all of them were structured so differently. And at the end of the day, I sat back and I said, well, what is normal? What is the normal way that a private lesson works? What are other instructors doing, or what are students expecting out of it? So my question to you guys is, if you were to sign up for a private lesson, so Sarah, you sign up for a private lesson, what are your expectations when you go to it? What are you expecting from that?
Yeah, I think that I've been in the situation of taking private lessons, and I'm thinking back a lot to my early days in agility as well. And there's kind of a pretty huge range of, and it all stems from like why I'm doing the private. And so I think that that's one of the first things you have to look at is why people are doing the private. So I kind of view the extremes as I'm booking a private because I want the space and the time and the facility, and I don't need or maybe even want the instruction. So I've absolutely booked privates where I tell the instructor, like, you can bring a book, do whatever you want. I just really want I'm willing to pay you to get access to the field. Is that okay? Right? I know what I want to work on. I want to do X, Y, and Z. I want to, be my own coach, or more often it's usually Esteban and I together, right? So we're coaching each other and we just need the space. But I've also been on the far other extreme. And I do this actually with haircuts too, where I go and I say, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I need. I don't know what to do. I'm paying you to tell me that. Right. And so, I walk into a hair salon and that's what I tell them. I don't know what I want, but I know I'm not going to blow dry it, do something. And I do that with agility instructors too, or I did, especially in the early days. And so then I would go and I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really have any expectations. And part of what I was paying for was direction. It was almost less, or it was kind of half and half about the time with the instructor as it was about the personalized direction from the instructor. So I kind of view that as the extremes.
I think that important question of why is a big part of kind of the answer, and thinking about all these students that I have over the day having different formats. It came back a lot to the why. So talking about the why and kind of going into some other scenarios, I think the why could be that some people find it better to do short sessions, especially with puppies, right? Imagine going to a class. Do you think either of your puppies would make it through a 1 hour constant class? So a lot of young dogs, that's a lot. Yeah, a lot of young dogs, people have multiple dogs. So they'll come in, they'll do 15, 20 minutes with their puppy. then they'll get their master's dog out, then they'll come back to the puppy or whatever. So sometimes it's just that the format of a class doesn't work. Sometimes it's scheduling, right? A lot of clubs offer evening classes, and maybe you work second, third shift and you need to do something in the morning. I have dogs that, especially young dogs, who get very worked up, very stimulated when they're in a group setting. So they have a hard time kind of keeping their head and keeping their focus. So the why, I think, determines a lot of the content. Those would be why I might do a private versus a class. But even looking within one team, I think the why is important. Are you looking for simply equipment time that works convenient to your schedule? Or, and this is kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about, are you coming into it with a very specific weakness? So I think the why could also be, I'm going to classes, I'm at the will of the instructor. At least that's how I think of classes. Whatever the instructor has set up for the lesson plan that week, that's what you're going to work on. But maybe what your issue isn't something that's going to be covered in class, or isn't something that is covered frequently enough. Say, for example, you need tunnel dog walk discriminations. You could go weeks into a class without there ever being a tunnel under a dog walk. So the why, kind of going into what are your expectations and what do you want to get out of it? Are you putting the responsibility on the instructor to come up with the content? Or are you communicating with the instructor ahead of time and saying, hey, I really need some isolated work on this particular skill. I'd like to book a lesson to get some, specific homework or some more detailed information on how I can improve that. So, what is the relationship that you have with the instructor? Are you viewing them as a regular kind of coach or instructor, or is it a scenario where it's a one-time thing? Somebody comes into your club from out of state and you sign up to do a private lesson with that instructor, and your expectations going into it might be a little bit different. Have you had that scenario, either of you guys, where you've kind of signed up for a private because somebody was coming into a town that you don't normally work with? And how would you expect that to be different than somebody you maybe work with on a more regular basis?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll take this one. And so I'm thinking back in the day, the first time I ever did privates, first dog, golden retriever, and we were getting her ready to show. This is back in the day, AKC agility. I think she went to her first trial at around 14 months. You could show at 12 months. So once I told the instructor, my goal is to have her be the first dog show in her litter. I knew there were several other people and she was my very first agility dog.
Competitive, huh?
Who were, yeah. They were going to, these other people are getting ready to trial. I said, I want her to be the first one to get to a trial. And she said, okay, maybe weekly classes isn't going to be enough. Right. So there we had a very specific goal, is to get her out and trialing. So we weren't going to be able to cover everything that she needed to do. So it was convenient to introduce the table, the tire, things that we didn't see every week in class, but now you can do it in the private, right? Let's do a rear cross. Make sure you can do a front cross. Introduce her to the broad jump. Let's work a little bit on the weave pulls. And so it was kind of set. So I think I came with the goal, and the instructor said, because, I'm new to agility, I don't know anything. The instructor says, this is everything you're going to see on your first novice run. You don't need all this other stuff. If your goal is to get her out as quickly as possible, this is what you need. Right. So
6 pulls.
Knowing your, that's an example of knowing what your goal is going to be. On the flip side, as an experienced competitor, one time we had, I think Greg Derrick came to Texas. He rarely came to Texas. And it was my first experience. We did the seminar part, and then he also did private lessons. So I took one. I think I was running the Rottweiler at the time, and I had the young border collie, right? And she ended up being like really undersized and small, really good rook. And so she was an I Spy border collie, litter mate to the Flash, for people who know the Flash. And we did a private lesson. I don't remember anything about that private lesson, but I know that I did not come to him and be like, I had this problem or that problem, because she was still like learning. I don't think she was even trialing yet at that point. Right. So we had some kind of lesson. So that's kind of what you said there. He came, they gave a seminar, and you're like, okay, well, this is my young up and comer. I'll do a lesson. I don't even remember what the lesson was about, but I didn't have necessarily a weakness for him to work on. So I think something parallel to that is where maybe there's someone out of state, and maybe they live in a place where the local instruction is okay, but it's not great or world class. I don't even want to say that it's not great. Okay. But it's not maybe at the level that they're thinking that they want, or they have an opportunity to say, come in and work with Jennifer, or, Sarah Baker comes and gives a seminar and she's also doing privates on the side. I think it's a lot harder for those people, if this is their first dog, to say, this is what I want, or this is what I need. And there I would expect a Greg Garrett or a Jennifer Crane or a Sarah Baker to have a lot more input into what's going on with me and my young dog.
Right. Well, I think there you're really looking at privates as access to the instructor, not just the instructor, but that instructor. It's really about the person. And so there, you really are you just want to be able to train with that person because you don't normally get that opportunity. And so you're going to, be excited to have that time, and whatever they have set up, whatever they want to work with you on, you're happy to do. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that is an interesting and different scenario too than booking privates with your instructor, the one that you go to every single week. There, you're really paying for the additional instruction rather than the person. You have access to that person all the time through the weekly classes. You're paying for the one-on-one, or like Jennifer said, the schedule. And so I think that, I think one of the things Jennifer said that I think is just key in all of this is the communication. So what are you expecting? What do you want out of it? Because I think a lot of those examples that we gave for the whys, so some of those being, my dog is a very high dog, and I feel better about having a private than a group, right? I don't trust my dog around other dogs, for instance, right? Or the weekly schedule doesn't work with my schedule. So those two cases in particular, I would think that those people are very often going to be perfectly happy doing exactly what is done in the weekly class, but just in a private setting. Mm-hmm. Right? They'd be happy doing the same exercises, the same drills, the same course that's set up, the same small spaces that are set up, because they're really just paying for the perk of the private environment, whether that is time or, presence of other dogs. Right. But if you have somebody who came to the weekly class and then they are also coming to a private later that week, they're not going to want to do the same thing. They're going to want to do something different.
Well, I think there it's important to be very problem focused, right? Like, I'm having problems with soft side entries on weave poles, or I've got these terrible contacts, and, in class, I just want to work on the handling. But Jen's like, hey, maybe you need some private. I don't know. Have you done this before? Like, hey, you maybe consider some extra contact work here on the side. I can't take 10 minutes out of each 1 hour class to fix these contacts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's happened before, and I think still happens. I don't teach as many classes now as I used to. And most of the classes that I teach are with students who I have quite a standing relationship on, and many of them do privates. So I think, one of the things is talking about kind of the frequency of privates, which really goes back to all the things that we talked about. But in this example, so the people that I see regularly every week in classes, many of them, not all of them, but many of them also have a once a month private. And what this does is it gives us a chance to kind of jot down what problems they're having in class that we can't take the time to do, exactly as you mentioned. So if you're working on start line stress, I'm using that as just an example. That's kind of a hard one to do in class. You have to take the time to, to do some reinforcement, set up some different scenarios. And if everybody else is there to work on master's level handling, you can't be giving one person in a class setting a whole bunch of extra time from someone else. So if I am seeing them regularly in class, once a month might be enough for a private. But if somebody is not in class, maybe they want to do something more frequently. They want to do every week and set up more of a standing lesson. Or a lot of what I have is people traveling in. So because they're traveling in and they're driving 2, 3, 4 hours, they're going to do a longer lesson less frequently. So they're going to book 3 hours once a month versus driving a 6-hour round trip to do a 1-hour lesson every week. So, frequency, I find the frequency of a lesson also kind of dictates how I structure it and what I do. I might be, if I'm only going to see somebody once a month, I'm trying to think, I would be inclined to give them a whole lot more homework knowing that they have a month to work on it versus somebody who I'm going to see every week, or I'm going to say, okay, this week you only have 6-7 days till I'm going to see you again. You have other activities that might have days you don't train or weather. I'm going to give you one thing this week. All right. And then when we master that one thing or one or two things. So I'm more inclined to, with somebody that I see regularly, kind of work through it live, where somebody I see less frequently, I'm going to give them all the skills. I'm going to give them steps A, B, C, D, and E, and then have them go home and work on it in the next month. Where if I'm going to see somebody in a week, I'll say, okay, here's steps A and B. I'm not even going to tell you what to do from there until you do that homework and you come back to me and you prove that you've done that homework. So kind of the structure and not just the content, but I mean, even kind of diving a step deeper in terms of like, okay, 1 hour, what am I doing in that 1 hour? I think for me, I tend to do like short stuff. I always start a lesson reviewing what they did the last time. I have little books on everybody. It's like a doctor's office. You have your file. So at the beginning of the day, I pull the files and I say, okay, here's what we did. So maybe a little review on what we did last time, make sure that looked good, see if they had any questions, some shorter drills, working up to some longer courses, potentially depending on the level, where if we're getting ready for a big event, maybe I'll work the mental game and I'll say, all right, nationals is in 2 weeks. You're going to walk in, course is set, I'm timing 8 minutes, run it, and we work our way backwards. We build the pressure and then we go down. And I think that this to me is why everything is so fascinating is I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe you've had different privates with different people and you realize that everybody structures it different. And I'm actually, as an instructor, interested how instructors format their lessons. But if you've done private lessons with only 1 or 2 people or the same instructor for many years, are you aware that there's different options out there? There's different ways to structure it, courses versus smaller sequences. And I think, Sarah, you kind of commented on this earlier, that whole, you don't know what you don't know. When you're in the beginning, you come in and if the instructor says to you, what do you want to work on? And you're like, well, I don't know what I want to work on because I don't know what I don't know, So that format of, and I know, Sarah, you've done some traveling to teach, what do you think of as different if somebody came to you? So answer this as the instructor instead of the student and said, okay, I want to do a lesson every Tuesday at 10 a.m. All right. I'm committing to 6 months every Tuesday, 10 a.m. How would you structure that different than you traveled to Ohio and you came out to my place and I said, hey, would you teach a day of privates? And somebody's going to come in and you get 60 minutes with them. How are you going to figure out in 60 minutes the best way to maximize both their time and your time?
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think also like when you book a bunch of privates back to back, that also changes like what you can do because you need to have some sort of base setup of equipment that you can easily work with multiple people on. And you can have some nesting and stuff like that, but it takes a lot more forethought as the instructor to have back to back to back lessons. So if I was coming in for a half day of privates, I would have to put together some sort of layout where I felt like I could work on a lot of different skills at different levels. And that's really what I would be looking to do. I think one thing that I did a seminar up in Ohio, actually. And one thing that I did as kind of a bonus for the people who did a working spot is I asked them to send like a representative run, like not your best run, right? Not like the wheels fell off and everything went bad, but kind of like a representative run or two to me ahead of time. And I did a coach's eye analysis of it and sent it back. But it was actually very helpful to me because then when I showed up at the seminar, like I knew that there were a couple of teams where they like struggled with rear crosses. And so I spent a little bit of extra time like with them looking at their rear crosses. I knew kind of what to expect. And then when it happened, I was like ready with what to give them. And so that was kind of my own spin on it. Of course, I'm very much a video analysis coach's eye kind of person. So that also falls into my strengths as an instructor. But I think that's one way that I handled it.
I find the discussion of different formats of lessons and how people do it to be very fascinating. I've never thought to have people send me videos in advance. What you did, Sarah, very clever. Maybe I'll have to take some notes and suggest that. So if any of you out there have had, a really great private lesson experience, something that you remember with someone, a certain instructor did something that you really liked, or you really liked the format, or maybe you really don't like a certain format. I'd love to hear about it. I'm always learning to improve as an instructor and learn what people are doing. Feel free to email us, team@baddogagility.com. Let me know your thoughts, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you think of as kind of frequency, why you're doing it. Has the instructor set up a really good format for you? And I would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are.
And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsor, hititboard.com. Happy training.